October 1941. The Eastern Front of World War II stands on the brink of a momentous clash. The German Wehrmacht, confident after months of rapid advances across the Soviet Union, has launched Operation Typhoon, a bold, high-stakes offensive aimed directly at the heart of the Soviet Union. Moscow. Injured East? German units are pushing forward, capturing towns and villages, while the spectre of collapse seems to hang over Soviet defenses. But appearances can be deceiving. As panzers roll across fields, the harsh reality of war sets in. Roads churn into mud under the autumn rains, forests hide ambushes, and villages smolder from the fires left by retreating civilians. Every advance comes at a cost, and the Red Army, though battered and outnumbered, is far from defeated. Soldiers dig. Counterattacks emerge, and the first hints of a strategic resistance begin to show. The Soviets understand that every delay could mean the difference between survival and total encirclement. From the German perspective, optimism is. Commanders like Heinz Guderian and Hermann Hoth see their armored divisions cutting through enemy lines, envisioning Moscow just beyond the horizon. Yet even as momentum builds, cracks in logistics start to appear. Fuel shortages, supply line difficulties, and the unpredictable autumn weather threaten to stall the seemingly unstoppable advance. It is a race not just against the enemy, but against time, terrain, and nature itself. Meanwhile, across the front, the human dimension of this conflict becomes clear. Soviet soldiers, often undertrained and under-equipped, rely on courage, improvisation, and sheer determination. Civilians flee, burn crops, and sabotage resources to deny the advancing Germans any advantage. Each small act of resistance contributes to a larger strategy, proving that the tide of war is never dictated solely by numbers or firepower. As we explore this crucial moment, you will witness a story of ambition, strategy, and resilience. The road to Moscow is open, but the journey is fraught with danger, uncertainty, and remarkable human effort on both sides. This is not just a tale of tanks and maps. It is a story of people navigating one of history's most challenging and pivotal campaigns. If you want to dive deeper into the strategies, battles, and human stories of this dramatic push toward Moscow, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell. Each week, we bring you closer to the history that shaped our world. With stories, analysis, and insights that go beyond the textbook. Stay with us, because the journey into October 1941 has only just begun, and the road ahead is full of surprises. As the German panzers thundered across the Russian plains, leaving a trail of overturned earth and smoldering villages, the Red Army faced a moment of existential peril. Yet their spirit and strategy refused to break under the weight of catastrophe. Months of relentless fighting had reduced their forces to a shadow of what they had been at the start of the war. Divisions were shattered, tanks and aircraft lost in overwhelming numbers, and the remaining soldiers often faced exhaustion and despair that would have crippled lesser armies. Yet, even in the midst of staggering losses, the Soviets demonstrated a resilience born not of recklessness but of calculated determination. Understanding that survival required more than brute force, it demanded ingenuity, adaptability, and a willingness to sacrifice temporary comfort for strategic advantage. In countless villages and small towns that dotted the route of the German advance, civilians and retreating units implemented scorched earth tactics, setting alight the wheat fields already harvested. Dismantling infrastructure and driving livestock far from advancing troops. These acts, often small in isolation, collectively formed a defensive web that slowed the Wehrmacht's momentum. forcing commanders to confront a landscape increasingly stripped of the resources upon which their rapid advance relied. The Red Army's counterattacks, though launched from battered positions and with equipment that often lagged behind German technology, were no less deliberate. Every engagement, every sudden sortie against an overextended German column, was designed not merely to inflict casualties but to disrupt timetables, fracture supply lines, and sow confusion among commanders who had come to expect unchallenged progress. Reports from the front tell of armored units pushing into gaps left by retreating Soviet divisions, only to be met by hidden anti-tank emplacements or sudden artillery strikes from positions thought to be abandoned, revealing a level of tactical foresight and courage that defied the conventional image of the Red Army as a monolithic and inflexible force. These actions, carefully coordinated by commanders like Ivan Konev and Andriy Yeremenko, were conducted under strict orders to conserve forces where possible while buying time to regroup and establish successive defensive lines closer to Moscow, a city whose fate seemed increasingly precarious with each passing day. Strategic withdrawals were executed not out of fear but out of necessity, a deliberate acknowledgement that to preserve the core of their army and maintain the possibility of counteroffensive action, certain ground must be relinquished temporarily, allowing units to survive to fight another day. In the midst of these calculated maneuvers, ordinary soldiers performed extraordinary feats. Men who had witnessed the capture of friends and comrades, who had marched through mud-soaked fields under relentless artillery fire, and who had faced the psychological toll of encirclement, nevertheless found the resolve to engage, retreat, and regroup with an almost mechanistic precision that bewildered the advancing Germans. The terrain itself, treacherous and unpredictable, became an eye. Autumn rains transformed roads into quagmires, river crossings became formidable obstacles, and forests that seemed innocuous from the air concealed entire battalions ready to spring upon unsuspecting columns. The interplay of human ingenuity and natural conditions created a formidable barrier, one that the Germans had not fully anticipated, and which forced even experienced commanders like Heinz Guderian and Hermann Hoth to confront the limits of their assumptions and the vulnerabilities of their supply chains. Behind the front lines, the coordination of Soviet logistics, communication, and command decisions reflected an army learning and adapting in real time under extreme pressure. Field reports, reconnaissance flights, and telegraphic communication provided an imperfect yet invaluable flow of information, allowing commanders to anticipate German movements, adjust defensive positions, and exploit any overextension, even as entire formations were at risk of encirclement. The discipline of units to execute breakout maneuvers, retreat in order, and link up with reserve forces illustrated a sophistication that belied the chaotic appearance of the battlefield. Civilians, often overlooked in traditional military histories, played a pivotal role as well. They not only implemented scorched earth measures but also provided intelligence, transported supplies, and assisted in rebuilding fortifications, ensuring that the human infrastructure of resistance persisted even as physical structures fell to the flames or the armored tracks of invaders. The psychological dimension of these tactics cannot be overstated. The Germans, accustomed to rapid advances and minimal resistance, found themselves facing an opponent that, though battered, refused to yield without exacting a cost. The sight of fields set ablaze behind them, the constant harassment from artillery and infantry, and the unpredictability of terrain created an atmosphere in which momentum became increasingly difficult to maintain. This resistance, both strategic and symbolic, reinforced the Red Army's internal cohesion, as soldiers drew strength from the knowledge that their sacrifices were not in vain but were actively shaping the operational landscape and delaying the enemy's ultimate objective. Each day of delayed advance, Each mile of contested territory represented a meaningful contribution to the larger goal of preserving Moscow and, by extension, the Soviet state itself. Thus, the German advance, impressive in its early stages, was not a simple march to conquest but a series of contested movements shaped by a combination of Soviet determination, tactical innovation, and environmental factors. The Red Army, though facing overwhelming losses, demonstrated that resilience in warfare is rarely measured solely by numbers or firepower. It is the interplay of strategy, morale, adaptation, and the calculated use of every available resource that defines the capacity to resist even the most formidable of offensives. In this intricate and often brutal dance across the autumn plains of 1941, the Soviets transformed apparent weakness into a tactical advantage, slowing the Wehrmacht's approach, buying critical time to reorganize, and laying the groundwork for future counteroffensives that would ultimately reshape the trajectory of the conflict. The story of these months stands as a testament to the power of deliberate strategy, human ingenuity, and unyielding resolve under conditions that might have broken lesser forces. As the German juggernaut pressed toward Moscow in the crisp autumn of 1941, the battlefield was as much a contest of minds as it was of machines and men, with commanders on both sides shaping the fate of entire armies through their decisions, instincts, and courage. On the German side, Fedor von Bock, commanding Army Group Center, bore the weight of strategic responsibility, orchestrating a massive offensive that aimed to break the Soviet heartland, while his subordinate generals, Heinz Guderian and Hermann Hoth, translated plans into the thunderous reality of advancing armored divisions. Von Bock, known for his decisive style and relentless drive, coordinated multiple panzer groups to penetrate deep into Soviet territory, balancing aggression with the careful management of stretched supply lines, knowing that any hesitation could give the Red Army precious time to recover. Guderian, famed for his expertise in mobile warfare, pushed his mechanized corps with a combination of audacity and precision, seeking gap Soviet defenses, yet constantly negotiating the tension between speed and logistical limitations, as fuel and munitions often lagged behind his forces. Hoth, commanding a northern thrust, applied similar tactics but faced additional challenges as the landscape and weather conspired to slow the advance, requiring him to adapt to terrain and enemy countermeasures while maintaining momentum toward the ultimate objective of encircling Moscow. Across the lines, Soviet leadership demonstrated a different but equally formidable set of skills, rooted in resilience, improvisation, and the ability to learn rapidly from each engagement. Ivan Konev, overseeing the Western Front, displayed a combination of calm resolve and tactical ingenuity, rallying beleaguered divisions, orchestrating counterattacks, and ensuring that even retreating units contributed to the broader strategic goals. Konev's leadership was characterized by his ability to interpret the chaotic flow of battle and make decisions that balanced the survival of his troops with the necessity of slowing the German advance, often risking personal and professional scrutiny in order to protect Moscow. Andriy Yermomenko, commanding the Bryansk front, faced similar pressures, advocating for strategic withdrawals when necessary while implementing aggressive localized actions to harass the enemy and disrupt supply lines, demonstrating an understanding that sometimes the best defense required temporary concessions of territory. Behind these frontline commanders, Boris Shaposhnikov, as Chief of Staff, provided critical strategic oversight, analyzing intelligence reports, anticipating German maneuvers, and coordinating reserves to plug gaps and reinforce threatened sectors, ensuring that operational decisions were informed by both the immediate tactical situation and the larger strategic picture. The arrival of Georgy Zhukov from Leningrad brought another dimension to the defense. a seasoned commander renowned for his organizational skill and ability to instill discipline and morale even under dire circumstances, who immediately assessed the vulnerabilities of the Moscow approaches and began coordinating defensive preparations that would prove pivotal in the months to come. The interaction of these commanders shaped the ebb and flow of Operation Typhoon, transforming the campaign from a simple advance into a complex dance of anticipation, adaptation, and counteraction. Von Bock's relentless push toward the Soviet capital created the pressure that tested every level of command, while Guderian's and Hoth's maneuvers exemplified the potential and limits of blitzkrieg tactics in the vast expanses of Russia, where distance, weather, and resistance constantly intervened. Each German success forced Soviet leaders to make quick, high-stakes decisions. Konev-Yeremenko managed tactical withdrawals and counter-offensives to delay encirclement, relying on terrain, improvisation, and the spirit of their troops to hold lines that seemed destined to crumble. Shaposhnikov's strategic oversight ensured that information flowed efficiently despite the fog of war, allowing Zhukov and other commanders to identify critical vulnerabilities, allocate reserves, and coordinate fortifications in ways that would later prove decisive. In many cases, the individual judgment of a commander whether to press an advance, hold or execute a withdrawal had consequences that rippled far beyond the immediate battlefield, influencing the survival of entire armies and the course of the campaign. Yet, the human dimension extended beyond orders and maps. The commanders were constantly attuned to the morale and condition of their troops, recognizing that leadership was not merely about issuing commands, but about inspiring soldiers to act with initiative and courage. On the German side, von Bock, Guderian, and Hoth had to contend with overextension, exhaustion, and the limits of supply, even as propaganda and early successes encouraged optimism and boldness. On the Soviet side, Konev and Yeremenko understood that even small victories in counterattacks or successful withdrawals could galvanize soldiers, while Zhukov's organizational skills and presence reassured troops that command was competent and responsive in a moment of existential threat. Each decision, each adjustment to a rapidly changing battlefield, reflected an intricate interplay of experience, intuition, and strategic calculation, revealing that the outcome of battles often hinged on the quality of leadership as much as on the size or equipment of the forces engaged. The convergence of these commanders' efforts created a theater of immense tension and drama. German units advanced with precision and firepower, seeking to exploit every weakness, while Soviet leaders orchestrated a mosaic of resistance, delaying actions, and counterattacks that transformed apparent weakness into calculated advantage. The dynamic between these figures illustrates the dual nature of command in war, one side leveraging momentum and audacity, the other relying on adaptation, foresight, and the judicious use of resources under pressure. Together, these personalities and their decisions framed the unfolding narrative of Operation Typhoon, highlighting how the courage, insight, and determination of leaders can influence the course of events in ways as profound as the movement of tanks, artillery, and armies across the vast Russian landscape. It is in this interplay of command, strategy, and human resilience that the story of the October 1941 advance toward Moscow finds its enduring significance, showing that the fate of cities and nations often turns on the choices made in command rooms, on muddy roads, and in the midst of frozen forests where the stakes are nothing less than survival itself. As the German advance pressed ever closer to Moscow in the chilling days of October 1941, the veneer of unstoppable momentum began to crack under the unforgiving reality of logistics, terrain, and weather, turning what had seemed a swift and decisive campaign into a test of endurance, ingenuity, and raw perseverance. The panzers, symbols of rapid mechanized warfare and tactical brilliance, found themselves increasingly constrained by factors that no amount of planning could fully mitigate. Fuel, the lifeblood of the mechanized divisions, became a daily concern. Supply lines stretched across hundreds of kilometers of muddy roads, often exposed to partisan activity and artillery fire, leaving commanders to make agonizing decisions about which units could advance and which had to pause, sometimes mere miles from their objectives. The carefully orchestrated schedules of armored thrusts were disrupted, as even Guderian, whose mastery of mobile warfare was unparalleled, had to confront the stubborn limits imposed by mechanical failure and the scarcity of vital resources. Vehicles that could once cover dozens of kilometers in a day now churned slowly through mud and rain. Engines straining, tracks breaking, as crews fought not just the enemy but the very landscape itself. The terrain of western Russia, deceptively open in aerial reconnaissance, presented its own hidden perils. Autumn rains had transformed the vast plains into a quagmire, with once solid roads reduced to rivers of mud. Swallowing tires, tracks, and wheels, leaving vehicles immobilized and vulnerable. Forests, interspersed among open fields, became labyrinths where reconnaissance was fraught with danger and ambushes could emerge from anywhere, forcing columns to slow their pace and spread thin to avoid encirclement. Swollen rivers and hastily destroyed bridges further compounded the difficulties, turning planned routes into obstacles that required improvisation and the laborious construction of makeshift crossings. Every kilometer gained was a small victory, hard-earned through human effort. Engineering skill, and the sheer determination of soldiers who, despite fatigue and dwindling supplies, pressed on in pursuit of strategic goals that seemed tantalizingly close yet perpetually out of reach. The weather, an unpredictable and merciless ally of the defenders, added a dramatic dimension to the unfolding campaign. Warm days early in the month lulled commanders into optimism, suggesting that the advance might continue with minimal disruption. But the gradual arrival of cold rain, sleet, and the first hints of snow began to sap the efficiency of even the most disciplined units. Machinery that functioned perfectly in dry conditions became unreliable, tracks clogged with mud, engines flooded, and weapons maintenance became a near-constant battle against the elements. Soldiers trudged through wet fields and icy rivers, their morale bolstered by early successes, yet constantly tested by the physical and psychological toll of operating in conditions that no training could fully prepare them for. The combination of fuel shortages, treacherous terrain, and worsening weather created a complex operational puzzle that required continuous adjustment. Foresight and flexibility, challenging the Wehrmacht's high command to reconcile their ambitions with the stark realities of the Russian autumn. Despite these impediments, German morale remained remarkably resilient, fueled by propaganda, the awe of past victories, and a belief in the technical and tactical superiority of their forces. Commanders encouraged optimism, emphasizing the inevitability of success and the symbolic importance of the campaign, attempting to instill confidence in troops who were increasingly aware that each day's advance was harder than the last. Yet morale alone could not substitute for fuel. Roadways, or operational planning, units were forced to pause at critical moments, creating gaps in the offensive and allowing Soviet forces to exploit temporary weaknesses. Counterattacks, well-timed retreats, and scorched earth tactics by the Red Army turned these pauses into opportunities, delaying progress and compelling German commanders to reconsider timetables and objectives. The psychological impact of the terrain and weather, combined with the practical limitations imposed by stretched logistics, meant that the campaign's pace, which had seemed unstoppable in theory, slowed to a crawl in practice. demonstrating that even the most formidable military machine is subject to the immutable constraints of nature. Field reports from this period capture the mounting tension between expectation and reality. German officers documented the frustration of stalled columns, units waiting for fuel convoys that were days behind schedule, and the ever-present threat of Soviet artillery striking immobilized vehicles. Letters and diaries from soldiers recount the physical strain of moving through mud-laden fields, the struggle to maintain mechanical readiness, and the constant awareness that each delay increased vulnerability to counterattacks. Even as commanders like Hoth and Guderian sought to push their divisions forward, their decisions were increasingly dictated by logistical necessity rather than purely tactical opportunity. The interplay between morale, ambition, and operational constraints created a landscape in which strategic judgment was continually tested, and the distinction between bold initiative and reckless overreach became increasingly difficult to discern. This period of the campaign underscores a timeless principle of warfare, that victory depends not solely on numbers, tactics, or morale, but on the integration of all elements of military power, including supply, mobility, and the ability to adapt to changing conditions. The German advance toward Moscow, despite its early successes and the brilliance of its commanders, was slowed not by lack of will or skill, but by the complex realities of geography, climate, and the limits of mechanized logistics. Each obstacle, each setback, required creative problem-solving, discipline, and resilience from commanders and soldiers alike, illustrating that the course of history is often shaped as much by environment and circumstance as by human intention. In the muddy, rain-soaked fields of Western Russia, the Wehrmacht's high morale carried them forward, but it could not erase the immutable constraints of terrain, weather, and supply, reminding all who study this campaign that even the most confident and capable forces must contend with factors beyond their control. The struggle of October 1941 thus becomes a vivid tableau of human endeavor, mechanical ingenuity, and the ceaseless negotiation between ambition and reality, as armies clashed not only with each other, but with the relentless forces of nature itself. By early October 1941, the German advance toward Moscow had reached a critical juncture, where strategy, logistics, and sheer momentum intersected to produce both stunning successes and simmering vulnerabilities, defining the precarious nature of the Eastern Front at this stage of the war. Among the most dramatic achievements of the Wehrmacht were the encirclements at Vyazima and Bryansk, operations that reflected the lethal efficiency of blitzkrieg tactics when combined with careful planning and coordination among panzer groups. Feder von Bock's Army Group Center, with Heinz Guderi and Hermann Hoth commanding mechanized spearheads, had executed a series of enveloping maneuvers that trapped multiple Soviet armies, creating pockets that threatened to annihilate entire divisions and clear a seemingly unimpeded path toward the Soviet capital. These encirclements were celebrated in German war diaries and newspapers alike, hailed as operational triumphs that mirrored the earlier successes at Minsk and Smolensk, and they reinforced the aura of invincibility that German forces had cultivated through months of rapid, devastating advances. Yet, beneath the veneer of triumph, the human and operational realities of such achievements painted a far more complex picture. The encircled Soviet forces, numbering hundreds of thousands of soldiers in what became known as the Vyazima and Bryansk pockets, faced grim odds, cut off from direct supply lines, surrounded by formidable German formations, and subject to relentless artillery and air assaults. The prospects for survival seemed minimal. However, the Red Army had learned hard lessons from the months of retreat and engagement that preceded these battles, and commanders such as Ivan Konev and Andriy Yeremenko applied those lessons with a focus on flexibility and resilience. Orders emphasized not only holding positions where feasible but also preparing for breakouts and counterattacks that could exploit gaps in German lines or force the enemy to divert resources to contain trapped formations. Soldiers in these pockets, often exhausted and demoralized by previous losses, drew on sheer determination, improvisation, and a growing tactical sophistication to survive under extreme conditions, constructing makeshift fortifications, conducting night maneuvers, and utilizing every fragment of cover that the terrain afforded. The interplay of pressure, urgency, and ingenuity transformed what might have been a simple narrative of encirclement into a dynamic, high-stakes contest of wits, endurance, and courage. As the German forces tightened their rings around Vyazma and Bryansk, operational challenges began to emerge. Panzer groups, though initially advancing with striking speed, faced the cumulative effects of extended supply lines, fuel shortages, and increasingly unpredictable weather, which slowed their ability to fully exploit the encirclements. Infantry divisions, tasked with consolidating the captured territory and securing the outer edges of the pockets, found themselves stretched thin, forced to cover vast distances with limited mobility, and vulnerable to Soviet attempts to break out or disrupt supply lines. The very successes that German commanders celebrated created new responsibilities and potential points of failure, highlighting the paradox of encirclement warfare. Trapping an enemy offers tactical advantage, but also imposes a logistical and operational burden that, if mismanaged, can transform triumph into stalemate or even disaster. Within the encircled Soviet formations, coordinated attempts at breakout began almost immediately, reflecting the evolving mindset and discipline of the Red Army. Units that had survived months of attrition now faced the necessity of acting decisively and collectively to avoid destruction. Soldiers moved under cover of darkness, exploiting forested terrain and ravines, while small-scale counterattacks targeted German positions to create gaps and secure temporary corridors. These actions were often improvised but grounded in strategic logic, demonstrating that even in apparent hopelessness, initiative and resilience could alter the tactical calculus. Each breakout attempt forced German commanders to make difficult choices, diverting forces from the push toward Moscow to contain pockets, repair disrupted lines, respond to unexpected resistance, illustrating how the Soviets were able to convert desperation into operational leverage. Meanwhile, the broader Soviet strategy focused on reinforcing defensive lines near Moscow, recognizing that even if encircled units could not fully escape, their resistance could buy critical time for the preparation of the capital's defenses. Georgy Zhukov's arrival in the region brought a surge of organizational skill and morale. Coordinating reserves, fortifying positions, and integrating surviving units into cohesive defensive schemes. Supply depots, transportation nodes, and artillery positions were strengthened, while local terrain features such as rivers, forests, and elevated ridges were prepared to slow the inevitable German advance. These measures reflected an understanding that the survival of Moscow required not only numerical and material resources, but also a careful orchestration of human effort, timing, and environmental advantage. Each day that the city's defensive network gained coherence represented a meaningful reduction in the strategic advantage that the Wehrmacht had initially hoped to exploit, turning the encirclement victories into partial, rather than decisive, achievements. The dynamic between German encirclements and Soviet countermeasures created a tension that defined the campaign in the autumn of 1941. On the one hand, the Germans possessed the technological edge, operational initiative, and high morale that had propelled them deep into Soviet territory. On the other, the Red Army, though battered and numerically inferior, had adapted its tactics, learned from earlier engagements, and leveraged terrain, ingenuity, and disciplined resistance to blunt the impact of German successes. The resulting interactions were marked by fluidity, improvisation, and high stakes. Encirclements became living battlefields in which victory and disaster coexisted in delicate balance, where the outcome depended as much on local initiative and environmental conditions as on grand strategic plans. In the end, the encirclements at Vyazima and Bryansk, while tactically impressive and a testament to German planning and execution, failed to produce the decisive collapse that had been anticipated. Soviet troops, through a combination of breakout attempts, defensive fortification, and careful coordination, mitigated the impact of these operational achievements, preserving both manpower and strategic options for the defense of Moscow. These engagements illustrate the complex interplay between offensive momentum and defensive ingenuity, highlighting how even the most formidable forces can encounter limits when faced with determined resistance. Difficult terrain, and the unrelenting adaptability of an opponent. In this critical phase of the Eastern Front, the story of Vyazima and Bryansk stands as a vivid example of how warfare is shaped not merely by movements on a map, but by the calculated courage, improvisation, and resilience of those who fight amidst the chaos, uncertainty, and high stakes of history in the making. As the battles raged across the fields of Western Russia in October 1941, the campaign toward Moscow was only one thread in the vast, interconnected tapestry of the Second World War, where events on distant continents influenced strategy, morale, and the pace of operations in ways that commanders on the Eastern Front could scarcely ignore, while German forces concentrated on encirclements, fuel shortages, and the relentless drive toward the Soviet capital. Other theaters of the conflict were undergoing transformations that would ripple across the global struggle. In North Africa, Allied forces were quietly but decisively preparing for renewed offensives, building, training, and reorganizing armored units that had been delayed by months of logistical challenges. The 22nd Armored Brigade of the British 7th Armored Division, for example, had only just arrived in Egypt in early October, weeks later than planned, requiring extensive retraining and modification to operate effectively in desert conditions. Theater commanders such as Claude Auchinleck and Alan Cunningham were assessing their options, balancing the risks and opportunities presented by supply lines, terrain, and the concentration of Axis forces under Erwin Rommel, who now faced the prospect of being confronted by well-prepared, reinforced units that could exploit the growing vulnerabilities of his extended lines. The Allies' methodical preparations underscored a broader truth of World War II. No single front existed in isolation, and developments in one theater could alter priorities. Resource allocation, and the timing of operations thousands of kilometers away. Meanwhile, in East, Japanese forces encountered setbacks at Changsha, demonstrating that even well-coordinated offensives could falter against determined defense and challenging geography. The battle highlighted the limitations of rapid advances when supply lines were overextended, resistance was unexpectedly resilient, or environmental factors interfered with operational plans. For the broader strategic picture, such setbacks in China contrasted sharply with the early successes that German commanders celebrated in Russia, offering a reminder that momentum in one region could not automatically translate into global dominance. The interconnectedness of these theaters reinforced the importance of planning, adaptation, and intelligence. Victories in one area provided moral and material support, while losses necessitated reassessment and realignment of strategic goals. The war was not simply a series of isolated campaigns but a global chessboard where timing, coordination, and the capacity to exploit opportunities or mitigate setbacks were as decisive as raw firepower. Returning to the Eastern Front, the German advance toward Moscow, though initially impressive, now faced the full weight of operational strain. Encirclements at Vyazima and Bryansk had inflicted heavy losses on the Red Army, but Soviet soldiers' breakout attempts, combined with rapidly reinforced defensive lines near Moscow, demonstrated that victory was far from assured. Georgy Zhukov's meticulous coordination of reserves, fortifications, and strategic withdrawals created layers of resistance that would test German logistics and command acumen in the weeks to come. Meanwhile, commanders like Konev and Eremenko continued to innovate under pressure, leveraging terrain, counterattacks, and the determination of their troops to delay the enemy, illustrating that even in apparent adversity, tactical ingenuity and disciplined execution could alter the trajectory of entire campaigns. In this environment, every kilometer gained or lost carried profound implications for strategy, morale, and the larger course of the war. The human dimension of these campaigns remained as significant as any operational or logistical factor. Soldiers on both sides endured extreme conditions, from rain-soaked, mud-choked roads in Russia to the harsh desert environment of North Africa. Commanders balanced ambition with the well-being of their troops, recognizing that morale, discipline, and resilience could decisively influence the effectiveness of operations. German forces, though buoyed by early successes and high morale, confronted the reality of overextended supply lines and the relentless Russian autumn, while Soviet troops, often battered and demoralized, demonstrated extraordinary adaptability and courage, turning adversity into an opportunity to regroup and resist. These contrasting experiences illuminate the dual nature of warfare, where victories are measured not only in territorial gain or tactical success but also in the capacity of human beings to endure, improvise, and persevere under extreme conditions. Reflecting on the week of October 10, 1941, the Eastern Front exemplified the intricate interplay between strategy, environment, and human determination, while concurrent events in other theaters underscored the truly global scale of World War II. The advance toward Moscow was more than a military campaign. It was a story of leadership, innovation, resilience, and the enduring struggle between preparation and chance, opportunity and adversity. Commanders like Fedor von Bock, Heinz Guderian, Hermann Hoth, Ivan Konev, Andriy Eremenko, Boris Shaposhnikov, and Georgy Zhukov exemplified the critical role of judgment, foresight, and adaptation in shaping outcomes amidst chaos, demonstrating that the course of history often hinges on the decisions made under pressure, with incomplete information, and in the presence of overwhelming uncertainty. As we trace these events, it is clear that the story of October 1941 is more than a chronology of movements, battles, and encirclements. It is a testament to the complexity of warfare, the limits of human and mechanical endurance, and the profound impact of leadership and strategy. From the muddy roads of Russia to the deserts of North Africa and the contested regions of East Asia, the global conflict of World War II unfolded in ways that were interconnected, unpredictable, and deeply human, reminding us that history is shaped not only by the might of armies but also by the ingenuity, courage, and resilience of those who face extraordinary challenges. Thank you for joining this exploration of one of the pivotal weeks in the Eastern Front campaign. If you found this narrative insightful, detailed, and engaging, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode of our deep dives into World War II. Your support allows us to continue bringing history to life with the depth, clarity, and storytelling it deserves.